We speak now to energy analyst Adil Nchabeleng for more. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Nchabeleng. So it's been said that Eskom's financial report is nothing short of a nightmare, with the headline numbers reflecting the utilities' dire situation. But what's your reading of these numbers and how Eskom got here to double its debt?
Look, it was expected that Eskom will be making a loss on the basis that, one, it has been running on a very low customer base in terms of consumption of electricity due to load shedding. 280 days in a year of load shedding gives you an indication that Eskom was running on almost the entire year without electricity, in terms of its calculations. And on top of it is, when you have load shedding, you reduce your sale of electricity, which means you're no longer selling at the level that you used to sell before. So the sale of electricity went down. On top of it, the load shedding actually compounded the problem because they had to go into emergency diesel procurement as well as a diesel fuel, other fuels procurement, including their cost of energy production in terms of generation of electricity went higher. I mean, it's sitting currently within the financials at 159 billion at the total of 259 billion rands that Eskom is bringing in, which means almost over 60 to 70% of your cost goes over to your complete, generation of electricity. So it's not a healthy annual financial statements. The loss was expected, and it's a loss that it actually is compounding with all other effects. When we did warn in the past that the IPPs are going to come back to bite Eskom, they are coming back to bite Eskom today. 41 billion is being spent purely on IPPs that are generating less than 5% of Eskom's electricity and accounting for now more than almost 30% of Eskom's cost in terms of revenue. So there is a misalignment with regards to Eskom's business model. Eskom is supposed to generate electricity and sell it profitably so that it can regain its cost. But so far what we're seeing is Eskom is actually now subsidizing all other non-core operations within its, within its own entities, and on top of it, it's taking on expenses that are not necessary.
Adil, let me just jump in there and ask a question in line with what you're saying. We'll get to the IPP. So, as you mentioned, the earnings margin has declined. That's to 14.7%, and that's primarily due to primary energy costs linked to the costly open cycle gas turbine production, as you mentioned. So, my question is Eskom making wise and prudent decisions?
Look, currently there is no any other way because they have to keep the lights on at all costs. So there's not very much you can do. The only wise, prudent decision is for Eskom to go back to its fundamental business case and as well as business scenario of operating its coal fleet that is currently sitting now today as we speak at 16,150 megawatts, completely broken down, unfixed, broken down. And they are sitting with another almost 6,000 megawatts in terms of maintenance. So if you calculate over 21,000 megawatts is completely out of production in respect to Eskom, and you don't have capacity to generate because one, you've got a 6,000 megawatts in terms of maintenance plan that is ongoing general maintenance that they do on units, which is acceptable, and then you have a breakdown of 16,000 megawatts. That breakdown, if it was operational and was maintained properly, it would have cut the cost down tremendously in respect to the amount of money that is spent on diesel, as well as the amount of money that is spent on its, currently generation of electricity and all the other emergencies that have to be done because of the fact that Eskom is in a crisis of load shedding. So, mismanagement, yes, happened in the past. Remember that, they're just reeling off from the history where, Eskom was under a very careless CEO at the time, which is Andre de Ruyter, who really made silly decisions in respect to management and executive. And they left Eskom to literally bleed to almost its knees, So right now with the current board that is trying to revive Eskom and give it back its life, it's quite a miracle that the losses came out to 24 billion. It was expected that it will be far much more higher than that, but it has been kept at 24 billion, which is quite a relief in a sense. It could have been worse, but it's slightly in an environment where it's still manageable.
I'm going to ask you two questions in tandem. One, to follow up on what you're saying, the Eskom board and its role. Why do you believe we saw the resignation of the board chair? But just going back to the whole issue of Eskom as a going concern, rising gas and fuel oil expenses are significant, particularly the contributing factors to the bad numbers. But how does this impact on the whole energy mix that is being planned for South Africa?
Look, in terms of the energy mix that is planned, with regards to that, the issue of South Africa's planning is the energy mix did not take into consideration the challenges that were going to be faced. Remember when 2019, when I think the IRP was introduced, we didn't have severe load shedding. We didn't have the current catastrophe that we're facing in respect to load shedding. So, the plan was that government was supposed to be injecting capital to assist and buy off the current debt level that is sitting with Eskom in terms of its, sort of long-term commitments that it has made to buy IPPs, energy and electricity. But nobody had actually even explained to government that this electricity that they are buying is not even usable in the grid. It's not even generating revenue because it was a subsidy coming out of government to subsidize the agreement that they made when they were building Medupi and Kusile to say, in retrospect, we will do an offset by making sure that we build an IPP independent power producers program that will be focusing on what we call renewable energy. So it's a re-IPP program that was supposed to be an offset for subsidizing the introduction of renewables. Not necessarily a value addition in terms of electricity generation where you can recover the revenue. Remember, Eskom is currently buying IPPs at a higher cost and selling it at a lower cost, which means it actually is losing revenue by subsidizing the current introduction of IPPs. So the losses are far deeper than what is expected. IPP's program is a 20-year contract, tender contract to all the suppliers. So whether Eskom likes it or not, it's still going to buy and lose money over the next 20 years and bleed if something is not done by Treasury in order to relieve the debt burden that is sitting within Eskom.
So the question about the board chair, and I also want to know about government. So Eskom was saying earlier on they're not looking for any bailouts, but just looking at the energy availability factor, it's a critical indicator of efficiency, but it's plunged from 62.02% from 62.02% to 56.03%. And I'm also just wondering, how's that happened, given that just a few months ago, the electricity minister was telling us that it's close on 65%?
Look, what had happened is when Eskom was at 62% in terms of energy availability factor is they were running at about 12,000 megawatts in terms of breakdowns. And again, there was a reduction in terms of maintenance, and maintenance was sitting at 4,500 at a time. But over the last week, that scenario had changed because while the demand has increased to over 29,000 and peaking at 29,000, and at the same time, the supply was lagging behind because they were using quite a lot of diesel, a lot of a pumped hydro storage system that was currently being utilized. And they were peaking in terms of using pickup plants, which were used for diesel basis in order to help bring in the electricity that is coming out of the, the IPPs. That electricity does not operate unless you run a concurrent electricity supply, which is what we call the peakers, where the generators are there to make sure that they are standby in order to make sure that they can carry the electricity. So you're literally doubling your cost to supply for one solution. So that is the one part of it, why there was such a higher demand, a higher demand, but at the same time, there was a higher electricity availability factor, energy availability factor. But when it slumped down, when the breakdowns moved from 12,000 to 16,000, which means Eskom lost another 4,000 plus worth of generating capacity over that period of a week. And as a result, it reduced to 55, 56% in terms of energy availability factor. That shows you that there's been a decline in available units that are currently generating electricity. And in that decline, Eskom has to go back to the drawing table, fix up the plants, maintain them, repair the current breakdowns that are currently happening within Eskom, and on top of it, increase its maintenance program. Robust maintenance required within Eskom is going to be a principle if it's not going to be an applied day-to-day discipline. So that's why we are currently sitting at a lower level. And the replacement of the board itself, in the board, there was just one change in terms of the change of the chair. The one chair resigned in Pomakwana, and there was an introduction of the new interim chairperson, which is Nyati, who is still getting his hands around the utility and the board. This is his first AGM, and unfortunately, he has to come in. And when he announces the losses of the result, it was not a great thing. But at the same time, we had expected that there was going to be a loss. There is no way you can operate a 280 days of load shedding, and on top of it, at levels like level 6, stage 6 level, and you do not incur losses. That is completely normal and was expected, and could have gotten worse. But unfortunately enough, you had a board that became proactive and started doing the fundamentals, which is the repairs, the maintenance, as well as the making sure that they can refurbish the plants that are currently sitting on higher levels of breakdowns.
Adil Nchabeleng, energy expert, thank you very much for your time.